Mortarion, demon primarch of the Death Guard, stood atop a rocky crag and watched him passively as his sons walked into a trap. They knew their peril. They pressed on through the valley regardlessly. Veiled by a sorcerous miasma of his own conjuration, Mortarion knew he was invisible even to psychic senses and auspicators. The rancid plague mites that clung to his body or capered around his feet were subdued, seeming to understand the need for stealth. The only sounds were the rasp of his breathing, the bass thrum of his armor's infernal power plant, and the drone of plague fly wings. The foe were not hidden from Mortarion's sight the way he was from theirs. Thrice blessed by the grandfather, Mortarion could see the ephemeral soul stuff of his victims. He also perceived the rot blossom auras of corruption and decay that clung to all mortal entities, even the God Emperor's vaunted space marines. There were two groups of enemy warriors down there, one on each slope of the valley, waiting to ambush his gene sons. Mortarion estimated almost a score of ultramarines in each party. He envisioned Phobos armored skirmish specialists, supported by a scattering of warsuits and portable heavy weapons. The nature of his supernatural senses was not exact. At this distance, and through occluding murk, Mortarion saw in terms of hopes and fears, slow decay and sharp intent more than physical details. Yet he didn't doubt Gulliman's gilded lapdogs were expertly dug in amidst the scattered boulders of the lower slopes, sensor baffled and perfectly arrayed to spring their trap. That was how they had fought for the past 32 cycles of war on this world, striking at supply convoys and renegade guard formations moving through the passes. Mortarion had no reason to believe they would have changed tactics now. Indeed, he would be insulted if they had. His sons were a far more valuable target than any rabble of unaugmented traitors. The Plague Marines marched onwards, several squads of warriors in a defensive spread, escorting a trio of lumbering plague-burst crawlers. A plump prize for the blocking, thought Mortarion. Fitting bait. The Ultramarines had been a barbed thorn in the flank of his invading armies for too long. Let them believe the warriors of his legion to be plodding dullards, easily trapped. Mortarion reflected bitterly that there were advantages to being forever overlooked and underestimated. The crack of sniper rifles and the thumb of autocannons announced the commencement of the Ultramarines' ambush. Mortarion sensed rounds smacking into his son's corroded armor and bloated flesh. The Plague Marines absorbed the incoming rounds, several dropping as massed reactive shells burst inside their bodies and emptied their squirming innards onto the mossy ground. As Mortarion saw the witchlights of their eyes gutter out, he hefted his scythe-bladed man-reaper, Silence, and launched himself from atop the crag. The demon Primarch soared upon outstretched wings. He circled slowly downwards, passing through the air as soft and hushed as a dying man's whispered prayers. As he descended, so the battle spread out below him. Its every movement and subtlety was laid bare to his strategist's gaze. The Death Guard appeared doomed. A third of their number had fallen already, though their bodies were so resilient that many would heal their hideous wounds given time. But the foe were intent on denying them that. They pushed the Plague Marines back into a tight knot around their demon engines, one of which was now just a wreck, belching spore-thick smokes from its burning hull. The Loyalists were closing their noose. Warsuits led their brothers' charge, while sniping teams and heavy weapons kept up their rain of fire. Any other warband would already have been annihilated. Only the ability of the Death Guard to endure the unendurable was keeping them in the fight. And that, thought Mortarion with grim satisfaction, is the point. The foe believed themselves the ambushers this day. They had not considered that their prey might advance into the jaws of their trap to draw them out, and then trust their own unholy resilience and the blessings of the Plague God to carry them through. But they had done just that. The Ultramarines had committed to their strike and would not disengage with the job half done, especially now that they had taken casualties. And so, like a warrior whose blade has become trapped in the meat and bone of their foe's body, they had themselves become ensnared. They just didn't know it yet. "Now," croaked Mortarion as he circled lower, a single word carried by sorcery through the Voxnet to his sons waiting aboard the plague ships in orbit high above. One word to trigger the rancid bloom of teleportation flares as the Death Shroud appeared amidst the enemy ranks. One word to propel Dreadclaw pods from their launch cradles, to goad swarms of fetid bloat drones from eyries amidst the rocks, to call in pre-sighted plague ordnance from super-heavy demon engines on the plains miles to the south. Such was Mortarion's might. As he fell upon the reeling Ultramarines, silence swinging in a beheading arc, the demon Primarch relished the opportunity to display that might to the foe in person, and to revel in the heady reek of their despair. Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and faces of the Warhammer 40k setting. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. If you wish to see the channel flourish and possibly take on bigger topics and get better resources, then like and subscribe. But also, consider joining our Patreon, or throwing a one-off tip in the form of a super thanks, if I have indeed earned your bounty. And today, we shall be taking a look into the 10th edition codex for the Death Guard. A few juicy morsels are therein contained, so I am doing a straight read. I think you will find this superior to a synopsis, as then you can hear the lore from the horse's mouth. I have not covered everything in the codex, as I have existing videos covering much of its contents, but this is a new general lore segment. So, let us proceed. To quote: The Plague Hosts. They are the grind of rotted bone, crushed beneath trudging yet tireless feet. They are the wet rattle of pestilent breath, the shriek of rusted gears chewing meat, the hurricane drone of all the wings of all the flies that ever hatched from putrid filth. They are the mortal manifestation of dread and despair. They are avatars of all that is spoiled and unclean. The relentless swing of the Reaper's scythe, the stink of a billion corpses as they bloat and burst beneath a poisoned star. They are the Death Guard, the gene sons of the demon Primarch Mortarion. They are doom. Those forced to battle these plague-ridden destroyers endure horrors beyond imagining. All they believe certain and solid decays and falls to ruin as the Death Guard advance. Their most potent weapons are proven ineffectual in the face of such supernatural resilience. Their mightiest fortresses crumble. Even their own bodies betray them to sickness and frailty that no ward or wargear can withstand. And no amount of strength, spirituality, or courage can resist. As the inevitability of utter and final defeat takes hold, as the miasmal vapor rolls around them and the hulking plague marines close in from all sides, the last despairing victims turn to run. Few retain the strength to find sanctuary. Those that do serve as vectors for despair and disease as surely as the Death Guard from whom they flee. So do the plagues of Grandfather Nurgle spread. So do the Death Guard march ever on. So does the galaxy sicken and wither and die. Nurgle's Legion. The Death Guard are one of the traitor legions that turned against the Imperium during the Horus Heresy. They have fought the long war against the armies of the Emperor's realm ever since. Fueled by bitterness and corrupted utterly in body and soul, by the repulsive gifts of the plague god Nurgle, they are amongst the greatest threats faced by the Imperium of mankind. The first warning that the enemy has of the Death Guard's onset is when stinking miasmal mists roll over their lines. The charnel stink of open plague pits assails their olfactory senses, while fever sweat buds like poisoned dew upon flesh suddenly febrile with palsied shudders. Bile rises in rasping throats, Gunge weeps from aching eyes, and even the most finely wrought war gear starts to spark and glitch as tendrils of rust creep through its workings. Even those fully enclosed within sealed suits of armor, or the enclosed hulls of tanks, are not spared the rising tide of supernatural sickness. Ominous sounds come next, rolling through the clotted air like foam-thick waves, breaking upon some distant and dismal shore. They grow ever closer. Tremendous toxins toll, ponderous, relentless, heralding the approach of a dreadful fate. A murmur becomes a rumble, becomes a cyclonic roar, as plague flies beyond counting boil through the skies and smother the foe with their fat, coarse-haired bodies. Those not already driven mad by revulsion and fear may make out vox-amplified chants carrying to them through the murk. They may catch the borborygmic rumble of unclean engines and the shrieking dissonance of rusted tracks drawing nigh. Some will even hear the shrill whistle of plummeting ordnance in the last instance before it impacts amidst their lines, reducing to rot those victims not blown apart or hurled high amidst geysers of fire, muck, and effluvia. Cries of alarm echo hoarsely through the murk. War-precluded sensors chime belated warnings. Hulking figures swim into being amidst the sepia haze, the lenses of their distorted helms burning with the intensity of a fever dream. Then begins the throaty cough of bolters, the peristaltic gush of plague spitters, and the plosive thump of blighted launchers vomiting salvos of shells. The battle is joined in earnest, and the foe's fate is sealed, for the Death Guard are upon them. Relentless war. The Death Guard may marry unrelenting brutality with an indomitable capacity to endure the very worst their enemies can throw at them. They take a morbid pride in defying their victims' expectations, both in terms of the horrific amounts of punishment they can soak up while remaining combat effective, and also in the relentless and shocking lengths they will go to achieve victory. There is no forbidden weapon they will not unleash. Scourging rad bombs, alchemically enhanced warheads, and supernatural plagues are all set loose to lay their enemies low. Such armaments are doubly effective when wielded by the Death Guard, for they can weather poisons and toxins their enemies cannot. The Sons of Mortarion fight on untroubled as their foe's flesh bubbles and runs like wax. Enemy battle tanks corrode with supernatural speed, and the very landscape of the battlefield sloughs from its bedrock bones to form swamps of putrefaction. The Death Guard employ phages and bioagents that should bring mutual destruction to all, sure in the knowledge that they alone can withstand them. Yet this is not to say Mortarion sons are content to let such weapons do their fighting for them. They are still Space Marines, for all the grotesque changes that have been wrought upon their transhuman bodies and minds. Deadly accurate marksmen, lethally skilled at close quarters. The warriors of the Death Guard combine martial excellence with all the tactical and strategic experience garnered from thousands of years of constant war. On the attack, they strike with all the shocking suddenness that is the hallmark of almost all Space Marines, be they loyalist or traitor. They unleash pinpoint artillery barrages and the malign touch of sorcery to weaken and horrify the foe. These weapons are combined with the onslaught of rhino-mounted heavy infantry and teleport assaults by hulking terminators to soften up and then utterly shatter the enemy lines. In defense, The Death Guard dig in and allow the foe to batter themselves bloody against their expertly chosen positions, while winnowing the enemy's strength with merciless fields of fire, hails of alchemical munitions, and perfectly timed counter-offensives. Supernatural horror. The martial might of the Death Guard is further augmented by the specialist warriors and war engines that accompany their armies in the field. Lords and champions of this gruesome legion lead from the front, some wielding nightmarish plague weapons, others swollen into abhorrent demon princes by the favour of Nurgle. Biologus putrefiers, foul blightspawn, and many other noxious specialists march alongside the massed ranks to unleash concentrated demonic plagues or infuse the legionaries with ensorcelled fortifying foulness. Mutated battle tanks and prowling demon engines add further armoured might to the armies of the Death Guard, be it squadrons of postulant predators barging through rubble and ruin with guns blazing, columns of ancient foully corrupted rhinos bearing Death Guard warriors into battle, or packs of repulsive demon-possessed plague engines. Such heavy assets have been part of the Death Guard's way of war for millennia. More ghastly yet are the demons of Nurgle, summoned from the depths of the Empyrean to fight at times by the side of the Plague God's chosen legion. Such malevolent entities spread warp taint by their mere presence, and can reduce enemy hosts to bubbling slop in minutes. Most terrifying of all is Mortarion, a demonic entity of incalculable bitterness and malice. The Death Lord comes to oversee his Gene sons firsthand. Flying into battle with heavy beats of his mouldering wings, the demon Primarch smites his enemies with arcing swings of the mighty scythe, Silence, annihilates them with the eerie energy beams of Lantern, and reduces sways of victims to corpses with his warp-born sorcery. No foe can stand for long in the face of such carnage. Swift assaults lose momentum, bogged down amidst turgid filth, unable to crack the redoubtable Death Guard lines. Formidable defences wilt and wither like the body of a famine victim, becoming ever weaker until they are trampled into the filth by Mortarion's warriors. On battlefield after battlefield, world after world, the Death Guard grind down their enemies and spread the supernatural disease of the Plague God before moving on to sow fresh sorrows elsewhere. Such is their most fundamental duty and desire. Sailing the void aboard deformed and contagious vessels, they strike at war zones across the galaxy. They wage their infectious wars. They husband their enemy's misery. They tirelessly propagate pestilence in all its forms and labor to bring about the final rotting of real space itself. Enfeebling order. The mere presence of the Death Guard on the field of battle spreads weakness, corrosion, and infection amongst the foe. In such conditions, any wound or battle damage can prove fatal. Even those Death Guard weapons not actively firing ammunition imbued with supernatural diseases or alchemical agents become lethal as a result. The wickering fragment of shrapnel that nicks flesh or punctures enviro-sealed armor may not itself kill its victim, yet it can still open a gap into which empiric contagions pour. The volley of hard rounds that would normally ricochet from inches-thick adamantine armor may instead punch through reinforced panels with unnatural swiftness. In such conditions, sheer brute force and volume of firepower may become a terrifying weapon in and of itself. After all, such pummeling blows need only crack a lens, split a fuel line, or scrape away a red raw layer of skin to herald the swift and gruesome demise of even the most resilient of foes. Fallen Sons. The Death Guard were not always diseased monsters. They fell into rebellion and degeneracy during the dark days of the Horus Heresy, led onto the inescapable path of damnation by their embittered Gene Sire. When the Emperor first set out to conquer the galaxy for mankind, he fashioned the warlords known as the Primarchs to serve as his greatest generals. Yet a catastrophe befell these mighty beings, scattering their forms across the stars upon the winds of the warp. Mortarion, who would one day take his place as the Primarch of the Death Guard, came to rest upon the vile world of Barbarous. The grim planet had long harbored a human population. However, their civilizations were oppressed by monstrous alien overlords. None could resist their hideous rulers, for no human could endure the poisonous mists that wreathed and coiled around the summits. So it was that, for decades beyond count, the aliens had ruled unchallenged, employing grotesque necromantic sorcery to transform human cadavers into the very monsters that hunted their still-living kin. The young Mortarion was claimed by the greatest of the alien overlords as an adoptive son. He haunted the humans at the bidding of his supposed father until, at last, he realized that these people were his kin, not his prey. Horrified, Mortarion rebelled against Barbarous's overlords. He employed extreme training methods to form the most resilient humans into a resistance force, able to survive the inimical Barbaran mists well enough to fight back against their oppressors. Ultimately, this rebellion was ended by the arrival of the Emperor, who reclaimed his son and ended the tyranny of the aliens. Yet Mortarion always remembered the lessons he had learned about the value of resilience and capable infantry, and his loathing for the unnatural sorceries of the Barbaran overlords. Installed as the master of the Dusk Raiders Space Marine Legion, whom he renamed the Death Guard, Mortarion put his experience into practice. By the time War Master Horus led half the Space Marine legions into rebellion, Mortarion had transformed his Death Guard. They had become a supremely resilient and indefatigable force, a legion built around exceptional infantrymen that specialized in extreme environmental operations. Infected by the bitterness of their Primarch, to whom they were unquestionably loyal, they had also become traitors at his bidding. None could have imagined how horrific the rewards of this treachery would be. While en route through the warp to join the Siege of Terror, the Death Guard were becalmed. Trapped in the Immaterium, the Destroyer Plague infected them. A demonic pathogen of such unbelievable potency that even the stoic Death Guard could not endure its ravages. Mortarion suffered worst of all. Driven to the utmost extremes of despairing delirium, the Primarch offered up his legion, body and soul, if it would end the suffering. What emerged from the warp to join the last and greatest battle of the Horus Heresy was a distorted insult to all the Dusk Raiders had once been. The Death Guard had been transformed. Their bodies, weapons, even tanks and warships had been mutated and infected beyond recognition by the dubious blessings of Nurgle. Mortarion had undergone a gruesome apotheosis, transformed into a demon Primarch, who was infused with the power of and bound into unending servitude to the Plague God. The Death Guard were now a blight upon real space, a vector for demonic contagion, and a living curse. Malignant Might. It has been 10,000 years since the end of the Horus Heresy, but the Death Guard still wage their endless war against the hated Loyalists. They have become ever more embittered, ever more corrupt, and what they may have lost in terms of unity is more than made up for with infernal power. It is said that, compared to many of the traitor legions, the Death Guard fell back from the failed Siege of Terror in good order. In the face of vengeful, sometimes reckless pursuit, the stoicism and grim belligerence of Mortarion's Gene Sons stood them in good stead. So it was that a considerable portion of their legion's surviving strength weathered the long retreat across the galaxy to take refuge in the immense warp storm known as the Eye of Terror. It was amidst the trackless reaches of this interstitial realm that Mortarion received his ultimate reward from Nurgle. An entire demon world was his to rule and shape as he chose, to act as a new homeworld for the Death Guard. a place of fecund strength from where they could strike out on fresh campaigns of contamination. In return, Mortarion's traitor legion would dedicate their victories to Grandfather Nurgle and, by their deeds and their worship, increase the plague god's might and influence in real space. The first campaign of the Death Guard's Wars of Contagion occurred within the bounds of the Eye of Terror. It formed a part of what has become known in dark lore as the Legion Wars. These conflicts saw the survivors of the traitor legions fighting for supremacy and survival. They were fueled by bitterness, regret, and recrimination, and they proved the final ruin for all discipline and cohesion for some. This was not the fate of the Death Guard, however. In these battles, as in the grinding centuries of war since, Mortarion's gene sons retained a greater loyalty and cohesion than many of their erstwhile allies. These are relative terms, of course. Renegade warbands and breakaway sects have scattered from the Death Guard's ranks like fungal spores over the millennia. Madness, personal ambition, fanatical faith, irreconcilable grudges, the vagaries of travelling through the warp. All these factors have been the catalysts for corrosive fragmentation amongst Mortarion's sons. Yet even now, in the era indomitus, the Death Guard retain numerical strength and organizational cohesion, bettered only by such mighty forces as Abaddon's Black Legion and the sprawling warbands of Perturabo's Iron Warriors. They still follow broad organizational strictures, and they retain, at least in many cases, some loyalty to both their demon Primarch and the Legion as a whole. This comparative unity has been both a blessing and curse for the Death Guard. It has kept them strong and resilient in terms of martial might and unity of purpose, yet it has also shackled them to the eternal malignance of Mortarion. The demon Primarch's brooding bitterness and spite have poisoned his sons over the millennia, as surely as all the warp-spawned gifts they could ever accrue. Some have come to loathe themselves and their blessed afflictions as much as they do their foes. Such half-mad nihilists now seek only to inflict these same miserable gifts of Nurgle upon every living thing in the galaxy. Others find delight in what they see as their blessed condition. These lunatics take a warped pride in being the only mortals capable of enduring, and to their minds truly earning, the gifts of the Grandfather. They, too, strive to spread their god's supernatural plagues, yet for them, this is an act of perverse generosity. Moreover, when their foes inevitably prove too weak to accept Nurgle's blessings, it only reinforces the Plague Marine's arrogant sense of exceptionalism. Whatever the motivations of the individual Death Guard legionaries, the gruesome consequences for the rest of the galaxy remain the same. For 10,000 years, their warbands have travelled the warp like airborne contagions, and descended upon unsuspecting worlds to spread sickness, misery, and ruin. Since the emergence of the Great Rift and the proliferation of empiric energies across real space, they have been freer than ever to spread their noxious taint. Era Indomitus, Millennium 41, The Plague Wars. In concert with some of Nurgle's greatest demonic servants, and aided by Typhus the Traveller, Mortarion invades the realm of Ultramar. Teeming battalions of diseased warriors and unclean entities pour from the scourged stars to spread disease and sorrow through the interstellar empire of the Ultramarines. Many worlds whose austere majesty and stable civilizations have endured millennia know final ruin beneath the relentless trudge of Mortarion's hosts. Ultimately, infighting between Mortarion and his allies, coupled with a determined counterattack by Reboote Gilliman and his warriors, sees the invasion defeated. Still, the realm of Ultramar will be scarred for years to come. A world of horrors. Mortarion's demon world is a malignancy within the void, known by many names, each redolent of suffering and corruption. It is a sore in the flesh of reality, from which flows untold foulness. Those few individuals in the Imperium who possess any knowledge of Mortarion's demon world call it simply the Plague Planet. To the Death Guard themselves, it is known as munificence. In truth, no name in any mortal language could encapsulate this accursed planet's repulsive essence. Despite, or perhaps because of, Mortarion's loathing for the world he was raised on, munificence is, in many respects, a dark mirror of Barbarous. Its worm-gnawed and malodorous land masses crawl with lambent mists, through which stalk cadaverous predators with witch-lights blazing in their eyes and flesh-hunger churning endlessly in their bloated stomachs. Rivers of putrescence cut through boundless feculent mires, vomiting their contents into bubbling oceans of unutterable foulness. Bizarre molluscoid castles of gelid flesh and flaking iron heave and sway as they crawl tirelessly across the landscape. Sprawling and heavily fortified plague factories rise from the haze like rotting mountains, their insane architecture owing as much to uncontrolled mutant growth as to the heaped accumulation of ferrocrete, rotted iron, and brittle glass. The pollutant runoff and roiling smog banks that pour from any of these pseudo-demonic factories would be enough to poison most worlds and their populations unto death. It is a testament to the accursed nature of munificence that instead their accumulated emissions only lend the world and its inhabitants greater diseased vitality. Many tribes of techno-barbarians and verminous beastmen carve out territories amidst the endless putridity. Some travelling, creaking caravans of rag-hung wagons, flies buzzing endlessly around them as they wend along their meandering ways. Some dwell aboard flotillas of wallowing gun barges and iron-prowed reaver ships, preying upon others that huddle in crude villages of whittled bone and carved blubber atop oozing islands. Bodies riddled with mutation and poxes, minds warped with ubiquitous horror, these tribes do battle with one another and offer dark worship to Nurgle, Mortarion, and the Death Guard. As pendulous bells toll in distant towers, the tribes of munificence make war upon each other through muck and murk. In the clotted shadows of branching smog chimneys that teeter thousands of feet high, the champions duel upon verdigris platforms wrought into the tri-lobe sigils of Nurgle. They strive to win the right to ascend and join the ranks of the Death Guard. Most enders burst and bludgeoned corpses, their mangled remains sinking into the swamps. For those who prevail, their journey into foul apotheosis has just begun. Now they must endure the ascent into the fumes above. The Death Guard themselves maintain brutishly fortified fastnesses atop munificence's highest peaks. These mountain ranges rise from the turgid swamps like the jagged spines of surfacing leviathans, their pocked and pustulent foothills dominating the land around them, their heights vanishing into dense clouds of poisonous vapor and warring viral strains. Some are gnawed by colossal demonic maggots, through whose labyrinthine tunnels the plague winds moan in a billion lamenting voices. Others are repulsively volcanic, disgorging gallons of boiling pus and plague bites with each convulsive quiver. Others still are sharp and wicked as scythe blades, capped with grinning carpets of human teeth, or rotted hollow and brittle. Each of the 7 plague companies maintain a fortress atop these putrid pinnacles. All are immense and powerful strongholds that bristle with anti-orbital batteries, trans-atmospheric docking facilities, alchemical armories, and plague laboratoria, alongside the foul-dwelling cells and martial training facilities of the Plague Marines. Any one of these malevolent fortifications could rival the fortress monasteries of some loyalist Space Marine chapters for both offensive and defensive might. Yet no fortress on munificence is greater than the Black Manse. Spanning across 3 titanic mountain tops and plunging deep into the yawning chasms between them, the Black Manse is the fortress of the 7th Plague Company and the personal seat of Mortarion. Within its fetid immensity lurked the demon Primarch's laboratoria, his astronumerological observatory, and his sprawling library of forbidden lore. In ancient chambers redolent with foulness, the Black Manse houses many of the mightiest war relics of the Death Guard, tools of annihilation bestowed by Mortarion's hand only upon those champions he believes worthy of them. Here, too, are the surgical dungeons of the Death Guard. Besides the Legion's stock of blasphemous gene seed, these deep warrens of corridors and chambers are fated with toxic flesh workings and monstrous experiments so utterly appalling that they would drive to insanity any mortal unlucky enough to look upon them for even a moment. The Plague Fleet. No infection can spread without vectors of transmission. For the Death Guard, these are the suppurating warships of the Plague Fleet. The void ships of the Death Guard are a far cry from the ordered vessels they once possessed. Some are ancient crafts that have withstood millennia in service of Mortarion's sons, miserable with battle scars, diseased mutations, and malevolent warp taint. Others are more recent additions to the Plague Fleet, seized from Loyalist, or on occasion even Xenos foes, infused with the blessings of Nurgle and broken to the service of the Death Guard. Others are gargantuan space hulks plucked from the tides of the warp and pressed into service. Since Abaddon the Despoiler and Vashtor the Archiphane sent their monstrous Arcs of Omen out into the stars, several of these terrifying vessels have even found their way into the service of the Death Guard. The Ogre, under the command of Lord Bolthorg the Blighted, is one such vessel. Its soul-hungry engines fueled by the agonies of the warbands who failed him during the invasion of Cortosa III. The Mother of Misery is another, a space hulk utilized by the Death Guard that voyages the howling winds of the warp and disgorges tainted spores and dropcraft onto Imperial-held worlds. Though they are broken into dozens of smaller flotillas and scattered at any given time across the immensity of the galaxy, the ships of the Plague Fleet are a potent strategic asset for the Death Guard. Even the smallest of these warships is supernaturally resilient. Their hulls may be layered with fleshy growths, chitinous armor, or feet-thick layers of rancid blubber and bone that can absorb remarkable punishment or even heal damage as fast as it is inflicted. Their weapons are lethal in the extreme, imbued with alchemical payloads, dark sorcery, or predatory demonic sentience. Becoming entangled in a boarding action against such ships and their plague-ridden passengers is a veritable death sentence. Even heavily augmented warriors cannot long survive a plague ship's apocalyptic, inimical environs. At the same time, should the Death Guard succeed in boarding an enemy vessel, they spread corrosive contagion before them in a bow wave. Many Death Guard warbands set out aboard squadrons of plague ships to spread Nurgle's gifts across the stars. They let the warp currents carry them wherever the plague god wills, emerging from the Empyrean and looking with grim delight upon whatever worlds their patron deity has laid at their feet for conquest. Legion of the Death Lord. Mortarion's Dictats. The Death Guard of the era indomitus are a far cry from the army that fought in the Legion Wars. What organizational statutes they do still obey are dictated as much by ritual significance as any genuine strategic or logistic considerations. Nurgle's sacred number is 7, so Mortarion maintains 7 plague companies in his honor. Many squads of plague marines enter battle 7 warriors strong for this same reason. Nurgle's arcane sigil is a design of 3 segments known as the trilobe. This is also embodied in the tendency towards 3 strong squadrons of demonic engines, such as fetid bloat drones or mythic blight haulers. It and the number 7 find countless other subtler expressions through the Legion's ranks, dictating the number of symbols carved into armor pauldrons or vehicle hulls, the frequency of Death Guard vox channels, the allocation of blight grenades issued to each plague marine in a squad, and the number of times sacred chants are uttered in droning monotone by Death Guard warriors as they advance into battle. Mortarion has long held an obsessive fascination for numerology. His influence has led his legion down this arcane route, even as they degenerated and fragmented, and has instilled in many of the Death Guard a conviction bordering on superstition that such numbers conjure the favour of Nurgle. Stranger by far is that, on occasion, this actually appears to be true. The Plague Companies. Each of the Plague Companies is a distinct martial force governed by the champions of Nurgle and their lieutenants. Each has its own traditional strategic and tactical emphasis, and most horrifyingly, a signature plague that sees through its ranks and spreads to any foe who draws too close. The first Plague Company are known as the Harbingers, and are ruled by the Legion's former first captain, Typhus. This Plague Company constantly moves from one galactic war front to the next. Their coming brings rampant infestations of walking pox, a concoction of many of Nurgle's most virulent plagues combined. Victims of this nightmarish illness are transformed into the shambling grotesques known as poxwalkers. Thus, the Harbingers' conflicts are characterized by swarms of these luckless creatures that close in upon the foe from all sides and bury them in groaning mountains of clawing, rotting bodies. The second Plague Company carries a dreadful warp taint known as ferric blight. Gnawing tendrils of living rust crawl across their armor and flesh and infest the squadrons of rhinos and battle tanks that this Plague Company favors. Roaring to war in smog-belching armored columns, the Second Plague Company brings a corrosive touch that swiftly destroys enemy war machines and fortifications. Known as Mortarion's Anvil, the warriors of the Third Plague Company prefer to dig in and force their enemies to assault their impregnable defensive positions. They are infested with gloaming bloat, a foul plague that causes their swollen bodies to leak rancid fever sweat and turns their voices into thick fluid-filled gurgles. The Eater of Lives is the master of the Fourth Plague Company, a gestalt demonic entity whose influence has spread the flesh-gnawing horror of the Eater Plague through its legionaries. Under the demon's aegis, sorcerers are given more respect and authority than elsewhere in the Legion, and the summoning of demons into battle is far more prevalent. The Fifth Plague Company are named the Poxmongers. They favor aggressive assaults and field numerous packs of demon engines to add a more savage edge to their onslaughts. Every warrior of their company is infected with sanguous flux, which causes rancid, semi-clotted gore to weep continuously from eyes, mouths, wounds, and pores. The Poxmongers leave gruesome red-black smears everywhere they go, and spread appalling, exsanguinating sickness through their enemies. To the warriors of the Sixth Plague Company, commonly known as the Ferrymen, or sometimes the Brethren of the Fly, falls the task of garrisoning and captaining the ships of the Plague Fleet. These warriors specialize in boarding actions to seize new vessels for their diseased armada. They carry the Droning, a repulsive infestation that causes their bodies and armor to churn with demonic maggots and leads swarms of plague flies to hatch from their pocked and heaving flesh. Then there is the Seventh Plague Company, whose stronghold is the Black Manse and whose master is Mortarion himself. Known and envied throughout the Legion as Mortarion's chosen sons, these warriors are masters of alchemical warfare and the brewing of especially virulent weaponized plagues. Their bodies host crawling pustulence, sometimes known as Nurgle's fruit or lump and splatter, a bubonic sickness of such vigor that means causing the slightest wound to many of these warriors releases sprays of infectious pus. Vectoriums. For all their theoretical cohesion, the Death Guard is broken up across many galactic war zones, its forces often divided according to the whims of demon princes, plague champions, or others given command by Mortarion's favor. Some such forces may remain staunchly loyal to Mortarion, while others make the most of their operational freedom to reave and pillage as they see fit, or even break away from the Death Guard entirely. These warbands vary hugely in size, composition, and chosen mission. However, all are known as Vectoriums. Vectoriums that fight together are usually named by their leader. They often adopt, or in some rather gruesome cases, manifest through mutation or disease, a unifying color scheme and system of iconography. A great many Vectoriums are comprised of warriors and war machines all drawn from the same Plague Company, such as the Tainted Lung Vectorium of the Second Plague Company, or the Fifth Plague Company Vectorium, known as the Sons of the Maggot. Others are more desperate warbands that bring together warriors from multiple Plague Companies, and even traitor guardsmen, mutated hordes, and chaos knights, under a single suitably mighty Death Guard champion. The Mouldering Claw. A Vectorium whose warriors hail from the First Plague Company, the Mouldering Claw prefers fierce close-quarters engagements and point-blank firefights. Their current master is an especially bloodthirsty Lord of Contagion named Gorgos the Malignant. A favoured champion of Typhus himself, Gorgos pushes the warriors of his Vectorium to strike with the speed of a sudden outbreak. The Mouldering Claw seed walking pox in every engagement, ensuring that groaning masses of poxwalkers soon infest the combat zone. Only once the foe is overwhelmed on all fronts does Gorgos lead his elite to strike the killing blow. The Pallid Hand. At the core of the Pallid Hand Vectorium is a sizable spearhead of battle tanks and armoured transports, all seething with the corrosive supernatural ailment known as ferric blight. Aboard these war engines rides a Reaper colony of the Second Plague Company. Their favoured battle plan is to carve a ragged gap in the enemy lines, using the massed fire of predators and land raiders before driving their troop carriers into the foe's heart like a stinger jabbed into an open wound. The debarking Plague Marines then spill into the enemy's midst like bacteria spreading through a wounded body, rapidly eroding their position from the inside out. The Putrid Choir. Comprising warriors and war engines of the Third Plague Company, the Vectorium known as the Putrid Choir specializes in defensive warfare. Once they have seized a strategically vital position, preferably a primary source of water, air, food, or faith, they dig in hard while seeding miasmic magnifiers to spread their foulness far and wide. The Putrid Choir then earned their name by blaring vox-amplifying dirges and tolling huge plague bells without ceasing. This soon drives the foe mad with soul sickness and feverish pain, and forces them into reckless attacks that see them dash to ruin against the choir's impenetrable defenses. The Apostles of Contagion. This Vectorium combines warriors of the Fourth Plague Company with assorted outcasts, renegades, and other Plague Companies, and even heretic warbands. They are led by the demon prince Balgash and his coven of malignant plague casters, and favour battering their enemies with sustained alchemical and sorcerous bombardment before they attack. By the time the Apostles of Contagion launch their assault, the battlefield is so befouled that reality has begun to rot. In such conditions, the dark prayers of Balgash's pet sorcerers soon conjure forth the demons of Nurgle to fight at their side. The Weeping Legion. Even among the unclean ranks of the Death Guard, the Weeping Legion are especially foul foe for their enemies to face. So heavily infected with sanguous flux are these Fifth Plague Company legionaries that even their armour and war gear splits open like living flesh to bleed diseased gore. Their bodies are sheathed in irregular layers of scabbed and hardened matter that gives off a coppery charnel stink and, when ruptured by shot or blow, squirts septic lymph and infectious blood in wide arcs. Battlefields where these warriors tread soon become gore-clotted mires of utmost foulness, amidst which the enemy cannot long endure. The Venom Mariners. Originally of the Sixth Plague Company, the Venom Mariners have become a virtual breakaway faction who serve the wider legion only rarely. They are led by the piratical champion Gluthor Skirvithrax, who commands their raids from the bridge of his flagship, Everbleed, and has established a formidable stronghold for his Vectorium on a world he renamed Vermidium. The Venom Mariners strike where they please and steal what they desire before vanishing again into the void. In their wake, they leave hidden miasmic magnifiers that toil away in shadowed places to slowly corrupt and ruin each world this Vectorium touches. The Fecund Ones. Mortarion himself assigned the Fecund Ones their task, and this Vectorium only admits chosen warriors of the Demon Primarch from the 7th Plague Company. They travel in search of Imperial Agri-Worlds. Once one is located, the Fecund Ones do all they can to corrupt the Loyalist breadbasket into a septic font of corruption, be it raining alchemical pollutants and plague spores into the world's atmosphere, seeding Nurgle-worshipping cults, or waging infectious campaigns against the planet's defenders. The Fecund Ones do not rest until their target sees with a foulness that will last long after they have moved on. End quote. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Like and subscribe if I have indeed earned your bounty. And do check out the video description for other entertainment opportunities, and potentially codes to make savings on games. There's a couple there now. But most importantly of all, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.